Good deal. All right, so here's the deal. This week we are going to continue our series. We call it Jesse's Boy. And it's a story or study on the life of David, King David, probably the most famous person in the Bible that's not Jesus. He certainly is the most written about character, or not character, but person. We tend to think of these stories as characters, but they were real people who lived real lives. And so we've been going through the life of David, and we've got this week, and then next week we'll actually close out that series. And so we've progressed quite a ways through the life of David up until this point. And so we started out, and David's just a little shepherd boy who's forgotten by his own family. The great prophet Samuel shows up at his house, is looking to meet Jesse's sons, and Jesse has 8 sons. And Jesse brings 7 of his sons out and leaves David out in the fields, doesn't even think enough of David to bring him to the house to meet the prophet. And the prophet is on a mission to find the next king. And so he goes right through all of Jesse's sons. He knows God sent him here, but none of these sons are it. And so he looks at Jesse and says, do you have any more sons at all? And it's like Samuel has to think about it for a moment. Oh yeah, that's right. I do have David, but he's the youngest, and he's out tending the sheep. In other words, like, he's not even worth meeting for you. Like, he was thought of so little even in his own family. And Samuel says, well, I'm not going any further until you go get your son and bring him here. And he's the great prophet, and so he gets to decide what's happening. And so they go and get David, bring him before him. Samuel anoints David to be the next king. A couple years later is the most famous probably story in all of the Bible, especially if you're a little kid growing up and you heard any Bible stories, and that is the story of David and Goliath. And so the giant comes out, and David's still just a teenage boy. Most scholars think he's somewhere between like 15 and maybe 17 at the oldest. We know he's not young enough to serve in the army yet, so he's probably not 18 or 19 or 20 years old. He's just in those kind of middle teen ages, and he goes out, and we know the story. You didn't have to even go to church to know the story of David and Goliath. And he takes some rocks and a sling, and he strikes the giant in the head with a rock and kills him, becomes the most famous person in all of Israel just from that one feat there. And Saul the king, who is going to be replaced by David, but he doesn't know that. He ends up taking David into his house and raising him up to be the general of his armies, and God gives David great success. And so as becoming an adult, David becomes really the most famous person in all of the land. Then he goes through some really rough years where Saul decides he wants to kill David because he's jealous of David's fame and his popularity. And so Saul, who is the king now, wants David dead, and so David has to run and hide in the mountains, and Saul chases him. For several years, David's living in caves and in fortresses that are out in the wilderness, just trying to avoid Saul, going from one place to the next to avoid the armies of Israel as they try to hunt him and his men down. Eventually, David becomes king. And last week, we kind of jumped in and talked about this time period in David's life where things slowed down a little bit for him. David was a doer. He was a warrior. And so David didn't like to sit around. When David sat around, that's generally when things went wrong in David's life, because he was a doer. He had to be doing something. And so he finds himself in this place of rest. The Bible says that he had destroyed most of his enemies, and that God had given him some peace. And he had established Jerusalem as his capital city. And he's sitting there in Jerusalem, and he says, well, I got to do something. So he says, I know what I'll do. I'll bring the Ark of the Covenant into the city. And so he makes that happen over a course of a few months. Some bad stuff happens along the way. He gets the Ark of the Covenant there. The Ark of the Covenant represents the tangible presence of God. It's where God lived here on earth at that time. And so they had a special tent that they had to build to go over the Ark. And so David one day is sitting in his palace, and he's looking out. I assume maybe he's out on a balcony of his palace somewhere, and he's looking out, and he sees the tent down there that the Ark of the Covenant's in. And he begins to feel a little guilty because he looks around and he sees the luxury that he's living in, and he understands this, that he's just a poor shepherd boy if God doesn't reach into his life and elevate him to this place of plenty, this place of being the king. And so here he is in this great position of power and authority and respect and honor and fame, and he looks down and he sees God is living in a tent while he lives in this big, beautiful palace, and he probably is feeling a little guilty about it. He decides he wants to build a temple for God, but God says he can't. And so last week we talked about that. What do you do when God says no? Because all of us are going to have times in our lives where if we're pursuing the will of God, if we actually want to see the will of God happen in our lives, there's going to be times where we're going to get it wrong. Because we're human, we're fallible, we're broken, and we'll make mistakes, and God will close doors on us that we want to be open. And we have to decide, how are we going to respond when God closes doors that we really want to be opened? And I think most people do one of two things when that happens. We either just try to push the door down anyways, like, this is the way I'm going, God. Whether the door has been closed or not, this is where I'm going. Or we throw our hands up and say, fine, I'm not doing anything then. And so David has this opportunity here to respond. How is he going to respond now that God has said, no, you can't build a temple for me? And this beautiful thing happens. David says this big, long, beautiful prayer, and he goes right back to life as if that no had never happened. And so we were in chapter 7 of 2 Samuel. Chapter 8 picks up as if chapter 7 had never happened, and David goes back to war. And he wipes out the Philistines, and he goes to their capital city, and he destroys their capital city. He's going back to war because he's a warrior, and that's what God created him to do. So after chapter 8, we can then come to chapter 9, and we find David back in a place where there's rest again. There's really nothing going on. And that's where we're going to pick up the story this week as well. And we're going to be talking about a kind heart, or a heart of grace, this week, as we've been talking about this issue of the heart through this whole series. The question has been, how is your heart? The Bible says this about David twice. He was a man after God's own heart. And so there's something special about David's heart that God sees. And because God can see that, God has used David in a mighty way. And so our question has been, if God used David because of his heart, then how can we line our hearts up with God as well? How can we put our hearts in a position where God can use us as well? And so the question has been, how is your heart on all these topics that we've talked about? We talked about courage, and we just talked about what it means to have a heart of integrity, things like that. This week we're talking about a heart of kindness, or a heart of grace. And so this little kind of snippet in David's story happens right here in chapter 9. It's my favorite part of the entire story of David, because I believe that chapter 9 of 2 Samuel gives us the most beautiful picture of grace that you can find in all of the Old Testament, certainly, maybe even all of the Bible. Next to Jesus giving his life on the cross, this is probably the most beautiful picture of grace that we find. It's a grace that's unmerited, it cannot be repaid, yet David gives this grace anyways. And so here we find David, chapter 9 of 2 Samuel. If you have your Bibles, turn there with me. If not, that's okay. We're going to have it on the screen as well, so you can follow along. And we find David in this place of rest. And as he's sitting around in this place of rest, I imagine the way it happens, right? Because it's a story, and I love stories, and so I tend to put myself in the stories. The way I imagine it happening is David sitting in his throne room. He's probably been judging over people's problems all day, and he's bored. And he come to the end of the day, and he's sitting there, and he probably wants nothing to do with that. And maybe he's been daydreaming that day as he's been bored, because he's a warrior. He doesn't want to sit on his throne and judge and rule over people's problems, and they've been bringing their problems to him probably all day. And he's bored, and he's kind of imagining and daydreaming, and he goes back to a time in his life where things have been really good. He didn't have all the stress on him that being king brings. He didn't have all the responsibility, the weight on his shoulders to now rule a nation. Every decision he makes has a ripple effect for everyone in the nation of Israel. He didn't have all of that at one point in time. Have you ever been there before, now that you're an adult? You think back to times as a teenager when you didn't have all the responsibilities that you have now. Now you got kids and a job and a rent or a mortgage, and you got a car payment or two, and you got all of these responsibilities that hit you every single week. Have you ever found yourself in a position where you're just kind of bored with that, and you kind of think back to when life was a little bit simpler? Maybe you're just a teenager running around with your friends. For me, it's back to Epping, New Hampshire, where we lived in a neighborhood out in the middle of nowhere on Booty Farm Road. That's quite the name of the road that we lived on. So we were out there living on Booty Farm. And right there near the neighborhood was a river, the Lamprey River that comes through, and we built a rope swing there. And there was not a day during the summer that we weren't down there at that rope swing, exploring those woods, swimming in the river, just having a blast. 15, 16 years old. We would get on our bikes and we would ride to the next town over, Newmarket, New Hampshire. And the river, that same river went through there as well, but there was a train trestle. And we would ride down there during the summer, and we would jump off that train trestle 70 feet into that river. It was a time when we didn't have to worry about anything. And I think back to those times often, just to be honest with you. And I kind of think back, and I know that there's no going back there, right? We know that there's no going back, but there's just something that's comforting about thinking of those times where I can relieve the stress of today just for a moment, remember what it was like not to have all those responsibilities. And I can imagine David sitting in his throne room here in chapter 9 of 2 Samuel, and he's finally defeated all of the Philistines. Now he's sitting there, and he's going throughout the monotonous day-to-day grind of ruling a nation, and he thinks back to a simpler time when just he and his buddy Jonathan, his best friend he's ever had, were just teenage boys living in the palace. Jonathan was Saul, the former king's son, and David and Saul had become best friends. And as David's remembering those times, probably with a little smile on his face, he's not letting his thoughts out to anyone else, but everybody in the court's kind of looking at him like, what's going on with David? He's not here. He's here, but he's not really here. And there's a smile on his face, and he remembers a time when he had been with Jonathan. And things were probably starting to get a little bit crazy. And when he was young and ambitious and impetuous, even when things started to get crazy, they probably were a little bit fun to him, right? Because he's a warrior, he's a doer. And Saul had turned on him, and Saul was coming looking for his life. And Jonathan says to him, listen, I'm going to see what's up with my father. I'm going to talk to Saul the king. I'm going to find out what's going on with my father, and this is what I'm going to do. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to come out, and I'm going to practice archery. I'm going to shoot arrows. And if I shoot the arrow a certain distance, I'll say to the servant that goes and fetches them for me, it's a little bit further. And if I do that, then it means Saul wants to kill you and you need to run. But if I shoot the arrow and it's close and I tell him it's just right there, then you'll know that all things are good and you can stick around. And he goes out there, and of course he knows that Saul wants to kill David at this point. And so they go through the whole routine so that David's hiding in the bushes. Nobody knows where David is, and he's listening for Jonathan's signal, and Jonathan gives him the signal that Saul is after his life and he's going to have to flee. And so Jonathan sends the servant back in, and it's just him and David there for a moment. And nobody knows that Jonathan's aiding David to get away from the king. And they're there for just a moment, that last moment that two best friends are going to share. They don't know if they're ever going to see each other again. They don't know if the next time Jonathan sees David, his father will have killed his best friend David. He doesn't know that. All they know is David has to flee. And so they make a pact in this brotherhood. And the pact is this. Jonathan understands this, that David's going to be the next king and not him. He's in line for the throne by blood, but he knows that David's been anointed to be the next king. And he says to David this. He says, no matter what happens between us, or my father and you, no matter what happens, promise me this, that you will always treat my family with kindness. Promise me that, David. And they make that promise to each other, that no matter what happens between Saul the king and David, their friendship will remain, and their friendship will extend beyond them to their families. Jonathan knew this, that if David became the next king and his line ended from being king, in the culture of that day, whoever became king next would kill everyone who had anything to do with the last regime, because they wouldn't ever want to risk anyone rising back up. So if Saul died and David became king, then what would naturally happen is David and his men would kill everyone in Saul's family. That's Jonathan, Jonathan's children, anyone who was a servant in that household. They would kill everyone so that no one could ever challenge his rule. So Jonathan and David make this pact that will never happen. If Jonathan becomes king, he will not mistreat David and his family. If David becomes king, he will not mistreat Jonathan and his family. Later on, as Saul is chasing David, he meets him in this spring called En-gedi. It means spring of the goat. We talked about this a few weeks ago. And David has a chance to kill Saul. Saul has to go to the bathroom. And he goes into a cave to relieve himself away from his men. He's the king. He can't just go to the bathroom in front of his men. So he goes into the cave, he disrobes, and it's a very large cave. And what Saul doesn't know is that David and all of his men are hiding in that cave. And here is Saul in a very vulnerable position, squatting. And David's in there. And David's men say to David, go kill him. This is your chance. This is your chance to end the person who's trying to end your life, and then you can be king. But David knows it's the wrong thing, and he creeps up on Saul with his knife. And instead of killing Saul, he just cuts a piece from his garment that he's disrobed and probably set beside him. And then he sneaks back to where his men are in the back of the cave. And Saul gets up, none the wiser of anything that's happened, and he goes back out to his men, and David begins to feel really guilty. He says, I shouldn't have even done that. How dare I lay a hand on God's anointed? Now, the irony of this part of the story is that God's anointing has left Saul, and it's now upon David. But David recognizes that Saul is still in his position because God put him there. And so David feels guilty of even messing with Saul. He goes outside of the cave and calls down to Saul and says, why are you trying to kill me, and why are you believing those who say I want to kill you? I have proof that I don't want to kill you. I could have just killed you. Do you recognize this? And Saul sees that David has a piece of his garment and knows that he was close enough to kill him and chooses not to. And Saul, in a moment of clarity, in a moment of sanity, because he was a tortured person, he was insane, literally. In a moment of clarity, he realizes that David's going to be the next king, and he shouts back to David. He says, he calls him son, which is a sign of respect from an older man. And he says, I now know that you will be the next king of Israel, and Israel will thrive under your rule. And he says, promise me this, that you won't harm my family when you come into your kingdom. He understands the culture. And David promises Saul, I won't mess with your family. Now, when Saul and Jonathan die, they die together in battle. So the king and his heir both die at the same time, years later. David doesn't become king immediately. He has to do some fighting to become king. And his men put him on the throne, and then there's another king that rises up, and so there's two kings, and David has to put down that king. And so there's some fighting that goes on. And during all the chaos of trying to make David king, Saul, all of his servants, they flee the palace and take with them everyone and everything that had to do anything with Saul's family, because they don't know who the next king is and what he's going to do. And while they're doing that, a nursemaid to Jonathan's child, Jonathan had a son who was 5 years old. His name was Mephibosheth. Really hard name to say, hard name to forget once you've learned the story. Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth was 5 years old. And the nursemaid to Mephibosheth scoops him up in the palace. And as she's fleeing the palace, because she's afraid of what's going to happen, on the way, maybe someone bumps into her, maybe she's running down steps and trips, maybe she slips on something. It's chaos in the palace. They're all afraid for their lives because word has just come in. The king and his son are dead. And so they scoop up the grandson of the king, and as she's running out, she drops him. And when he hits the floor, both of his feet or ankles break. Now, if he was 5 years old, he probably had no idea what's going on, right? Like, this just chaos all around him. I'm sure nobody walked up to him and said, hey, little buddy, Grandpa and Dad are dead. Like, that didn't happen, I promise you, right? The nursemaid just grabs him and starts running. And so all he knows is this immediate pain and this chaos that's going around, and there's confusion in his little 5-year-old brain. He has no idea what's happening. And in the midst of all the chaos, instead of looking for the palace doctor, who's probably fled as well, she scoops him back up and flees the palace. And his feet don't set right. They heal, but they don't set right. And it leaves him a crippled man for the rest of his life. Well, he disappears. And David is sitting here years later. I mean, years later now that like, he's an old man, becoming an old man now. He has children that are grown now. And as he's remembering back upon his life with Jonathan, and even in the palace with Saul, probably wistfully, he remembers the promise that he'd made, that he won't do any harm to their family, and even that he would show kindness to them. And so he has this question. We're going to pick the story up in chapter 9 of 2 Samuel. We're going to read the whole chapter and just kind of talk through it. So verse 1, one day David asked, is anyone in Saul's family still alive? Anyone whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now that word kindness there, it's a special word. It's not just like he wants to be nice, right? Help the old lady across the street. It's not that kind of kindness. It's not even the kind of kindness that like, oh, you dropped your books, let me help you pick them up. That's a good kind of kindness. But it's not just like I want to be nice to them. This word kindness, it's a much deeper word. It actually refers to the kindness that God gives us. It's a kind of kindness that we don't merit, like there's nothing we've done to earn it. It's the kind of kindness that you can never repay back. It actually means loving kindness, or it's a much deeper form of kindness. Here in America, our words can tend to be very surfacey. Their language is actually there's much more depth to it, right? So like I say this, I love pizza and cheeseburgers. I love my wife too, and I love my children. Now it's the same word for all of those things, but I better love my wife a little bit differently than I love cheeseburgers. Does that make sense, right? So it's the same word, love, but they mean two different things. And so if I say I love my wife, it means something different than I love a cheeseburger, or I love my pet dog, or I love my home, or I love my car, right? We love those things, but it's different things, right? We understand the meaning. Now here, kindness isn't just like, oh, isn't that kind? It's a much deeper kindness. It's one that can't be repaid. It's one that hasn't been earned. It's the kind of kindness that really only God can show. And we'll see that in just a moment in another couple of verses where he says it again, but he says, I want to show God's kindness too. It's the kind of kindness that David can give them, but they can never return to him. So it's a deeper kind of kindness. Some people might even use this word, grace. He wants to give grace because of his relationship and his promise to Jonathan and to Saul. So he says, is there anyone out there? He doesn't even know. He hasn't heard from anyone. In chaos, everyone fled. They've all been in hiding, or they're all dead. He doesn't know what's going on. So he asks. Well, no one around the palace knows. And so they go and get Saul's, the former king's, servant. So he summoned a man named Ziba, who had been one of Saul's servants. He said, Are you Ziba, the king asked. Yes, sir, I am, Ziba replied. The king then asked him, is anyone still alive from Saul's family? If so, I want to show God's kindness to them. So he wants to know, is anyone alive? And Ziba replies, he says, yes, one of Jonathan's sons is still alive. He is crippled in both feet. And immediately David says, where is he? Like he wants to know where he is. And so this Ziba tells him. He says he is in Lodabar at the home of Machir, son of Amiel. Now, Lodabar is an interesting name. I'm going to get to that in just a minute. But the really cool thing here is David's response when he hears about Mephibosheth. You see, David would remember who Mephibosheth was. His best friend was Mephibosheth's dad. And so David was probably Uncle Dave to Mephibosheth. And David probably has really great memories of Mephibosheth, the little kid running around. And if you can imagine with me, if you can just go back to this time with me, what Mephibosheth might have been like at 5 years old running around the palace. Now, I have kids. My youngest is 7, so not much older than Mephibosheth was at that time. And I know this about my kids, and if you have kids, you know this about them as well. They love heroes, right? Every little kid has heroes. Now, I'm sure I'm the hero for my kids, like you are, but like every kid has heroes. And so every kid runs around pretending to be those heroes. There was no one in Israel at that time more famous than David. Mephibosheth, I guarantee you, had a sling. And I guarantee you he had a little sword and a little shield. And I guarantee you he ran around the palace as David. And he probably had little pebbles in his sling. And since he's the king's grandson, he can do anything with them. And I can just see him peeking around corners. And when a servant's not looking, pegging him in the butt with a rock, right? Just slaying Goliath all over the place. Can you see that with me? A little 5-year-old kid doing that? Because he wanted to be Uncle Dave. I guarantee it. Thousands of children all over Israel wanted to be David. He was the giant slayer, the most famous warrior in all the land. Now, my kids growing up, they didn't have David as their hero. I can remember Connor. Connor really liked Power Rangers. Any Power Ranger fans out there from back in the day? Connor's a little young for Power Rangers, but when you're a good parent, you introduce your kids to the good things in life, right? So Thundercats, He-Man, all that stuff, I've given it all to them, right? So Connor loved Power Rangers, and he wanted to be a ninja when he was growing up. And so I remember when Connor was about that age, he would say to me, Dad, I want to be a ninja when I grow up. And then like 2 weeks later, it changed. And he came to me one day, he said, Dad, I don't want to be a ninja anymore. You don't want to be a ninja anymore? What do you want to be? He goes, yeah, I want to be a blood ninja. Now, I don't know what a blood ninja is, but it sounds cooler than just a plain old regular ninja, right? All kids want to be something else, something greater. Brady, my youngest son now, he loves superheroes. Like all of the comic book superheroes, and none of them have ever been more loved by him than Captain America. And Brady, since he could walk, has been Captain America. He's had Captain America masks, he had the Captain America shields, he even had a Captain America cape. Now, I know what you're going to say, Captain America doesn't wear a cape, but when you're 3, every superhero has a cape. And so Brady would rock that Captain America cape wherever he went. He didn't go anywhere without his Captain, it was actually Captain America, because he was 3, he couldn't say America. So Captain America cape. And everywhere we went, anything that looked like America was Captain America. There was no United States of America. That's not the American flag. It's the Captain America flag. And so every symbol of America he saw was Captain America, right? He just wanted to be Captain America. And he'd put on his mask and become Captain America. And we'd say, Captain America, where's Brady, right? Because Brady's obviously not there. It's Captain America. And he'd go, ha, right? And he'd go, oh, Brady, there you are. What happened to Captain America? Oh, Captain America, where'd Brady go? You guys have all played this with your kids. It goes on forever and never gets old. I guarantee you Mephibosheth growing up was Uncle Dave all the time. So David just remembers Mephibosheth. He probably wrestled with him on the floor, and David's really, really, really excited to see old, I don't know, he probably had a nickname for him. Fib. Bosheth. I don't know, what do you do with that? I don't know, right? But he had a nickname for him. I guarantee it, right? Hey, little Bosheth, what's happening? Right? There was a nickname, something. Uncle Dave and Bosheth wrestling on the floor. That's the memory that David gets, and he gets really excited and says, well, go get him. I guarantee it wasn't the same for Mephibosheth. Guarantee things had changed for Mephibosheth since he was 5 years old. His grandfather and father were killed, and his feet were broken. He became a crippled for the rest of his life. You see, Mephibosheth's in a place called Lodabar, and names are very important in the Old Testament. They're important in the whole Bible. They're really important in the Old Testament. And the word Lodabar means this, no pasture land. Now, I don't know about you, but if you live in a place that there's no pasture land, right, it's probably not a great place to live. It's the kind of place where you go if you're trying to get away from society, not if you're trying to make it, right? So here's Mephibosheth living in a place called no pasture land. There's nowhere to raise sheep. There's no way to take care of your family. It's the kind of place that thieves and outlaws go to stay out and away from everybody so that they can hide. That's the kind of place that Mephibosheth has gone to. See, he grew up in a place of grace, the palace, but now he's had to move into the graceless place, Lodabar, out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by graceless people living a graceless life. And so he has now been raised as the son of the king, the grandson of the king, but he can't tell anyone who he is. Because if he tells them who he is, then the king finds out where he is and he comes and kills him. So he's grown up his whole life with that kind of fear of the king who was Uncle Dave. And so now instead of being the object of all of his, everything he wanted to be in life, now David is now the object of fear and anxiety as he's tried to hide his own person, who he was, his own identity from everyone else. And he's lived life in a graceless place while being a cripple, equal physically to no man, surrounded by thugs. And that's where he's been raised. And I guarantee you he's lived his life in fear and in hiding from the king. And so David hears about Mephibosheth and says, yes, Mephibosheth, I miss him. Mephibosheth hears about David and he quakes with fear when it happens. So David, not realizing that, says, go get him. I got to show him kindness. And so he sends his men to Lodabar, to the graceless place, to no pasture land, to find the hidden Mephibosheth. So David sent for him and brought him, we're picking up in verse 5, David sent for him and brought him from Machir's home. His name was Mephibosheth. He was Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson. When he came to David, he bowed low to the ground in deep respect. David said, greetings, Mephibosheth. Now this is interesting to me, because if you're Mephibosheth, that's not the greeting you're expecting. You're not expecting kind words from David. And so he comes in, he probably hobbles in, maybe with the aid of crutches or with the aid of somebody else. He hobbles into the throne room. The throne room is surrounded by perfect people, beautiful people, right? This is the king in the king's palace, surrounded by perfect, beautiful people. And here he comes, a cripple, been living an outlaw for his whole life, and he comes hobbling into the king's throne and immediately throws himself down on the ground, face down. And what he's probably expecting from David is either a harsh word and rebuke or an order for execution, or for David to kill him himself. Maybe even to torture him a little bit before he kills him. Instead, what he gets is a kind word from David. I can imagine David's voice wasn't like, Mephibosheth. It was like, greeting, hey, Mephibosheth. Hey, buddy. It's me, Uncle Dave. Like, that's the kind of greeting he's getting. There's kindness in David's voice. And it's not what Mephibosheth is expecting. And I know that because of this next line. Mephibosheth replied, I am your servant. And then David said, don't be afraid. There's an exclamation point there. It startles David with how afraid Mephibosheth seems in front of him. Because David remembers the good times. Mephibosheth has only ever known fear and anxiety and loneliness. And he says, don't be afraid, for I intend to show you, there's that word again, kindness or grace, because of my promise to your father, Jonathan. And then this beautiful thing happens. Right here is the most beautiful picture of grace, in my opinion, in all of the Old Testament, is what David does from here. He says, I intend to show you kindness because of your father, for I will give you all of the property that once belonged to your grandfather, Saul, and you will eat here with me at the king's table. Mephibosheth bowed respectfully, and he exclaimed, and this shows you the state of mind he's still in. He says, who is your servant that you should show such kindness or such grace to a dead dog like me? Mephibosheth holds himself in such low esteem that he's not even the value of an alive dog. He's a dead dog. And so that shows you his mindset of growing up in the graceless place of Lodabar and who he is now as a crippled human being. And he says, a dead dog like me. Then the king summoned Saul's servant Ziba back in, and he said, I've given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and servants are to farm the land for him to produce food for your master's household. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, will eat here at my table. Ziba replied, yes, my lord king, I am your servant, and I will do all that you have commanded. And from that time on, Mephibosheth ate regularly at David's table, like one of the king's own sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah. From then on, all the members of Ziba's household were Mephibosheth's servants. And Mephibosheth, who was crippled in both feet, lived in Jerusalem and ate regularly at the king's table. It's this beautiful picture of grace that David shows Mephibosheth. It's the kind of loving kindness that can't ever be repaid. Mephibosheth did nothing to earn this kind of grace and kindness from David. Matter of fact, he wasn't even trying to get it from David. He was hiding, trying to stay hidden from David. He didn't want David to know he even existed. Yet David finds him, brings him to the palace, and invites him in to even be a member of his family. There's nothing that Mephibosheth can do to earn it. He can never even repay this kind of kindness to David. Yet that's the kind of grace that David gives. We've been asking this question all throughout this series. How is your heart? Today we're talking about a heart of grace or a heart of kindness. I want to show you a couple parallels, and I wrote these down. I don't normally use notes, but I wrote these down because I just wanted to make sure that I got them right. I often joke that I have a mind like a bolt, but it's more like a sieve. And so I wrote them down, but there's 8 parallels I see here to really the story of God and humanity. David here as the king representing our king and Lord and Savior, and Mephibosheth representing us, the people. And so let me just read these to you. They're pretty profound in my opinion. Once Mephibosheth enjoyed uninterrupted fellowship with his father, son of King Saul. So with Adam, who walked with the Lord in the cool of the evening and enjoyed fellowship with his heavenly father. Like Adam, Mephibosheth once knew what it was like to be in close relationship with the king. Second, when disaster came, the nurse fled in fear, and Mephibosheth suffered a fall. It left him crippled for the rest of his days. The first response of humanity was to hide from God and to find reasons for not finding God. As a result, mankind has become spiritually crippled. David, the king, out of sheer love for Jonathan, demonstrates grace to his handicapped son. God, out of love for his son, Jesus, and the penalty he paid on the cross, demonstrates grace to the believing sinners. He is still seeking people who are spiritually disabled, dead due to depravity, lost in trespasses and sin, hidden from God, broken, fearful, and confused. The fourth thing, Mephibosheth had nothing, deserved nothing, could repay nothing. In fact, he didn't even try to win the king's favor. He was hiding from the king. The same is true for us. We deserved nothing, had nothing, and could offer God nothing. The fifth, David restored Mephibosheth from a place of barrenness to a place of honor. He took this broken person from a hiding place where there was no grace and brought him to a place of plenty, right into the courtroom of the king. The analogy is clear. God has taken us from where we were and brought us to where he is. You do realize there's nothing you can do to get to him. It's he who brings you to him, the place of fellowship with him. Sixth, David adopted Mephibosheth into his family, and he became one of the king's sons. This is what God has done for us, adopted us into his family, and he seats us at his table. The seventh, Mephibosheth's disability was a constant reminder of grace. He had nothing but crutches, yet he was given the place of plenty of the king. Every time he limped from one place to the next, he was reminded, I am in this magnificent place enjoying the pleasure of this position because of the grace of the king and nothing else. That's the way it is with us. Our continual problem with sin is a continual reminder of God's grace to us. The eighth thing, when Mephibosheth sat down at the table of the king, he was treated just like any other son of the king. That's the way it is now and how it will be throughout eternity. When God looks at you and says, you are as important to me as any of my other sons and daughters. And I think it's important to point out this as well, is that for Mephibosheth, who was crippled in both feet, that whenever he was standing and walking, he was equal to no man. But when he sat at the king's table, the tablecloth of grace covered all of his brokenness. He was equal to everyone when he sat at the king's table, and it's the same for us. That walking around on our own, we're broken, and we are bruised, and we are battered by this broken and bruised world that we live in. If you live in this world for long, then you'll feel pain, and you'll feel suffering. It's going to happen. You will have scars. I'm talking about spiritual, inner scars. But when you sit at the table of grace, it's all covered. Covered by the king who invites you there freely and gives you that kind of grace, whether you ask for it or not. There's just a couple things I think we need to learn from this story real quick before we let you go. The first thing is this, is that the very same grace that David offers Mephibosheth here, God offers to you and I. That this same grace is available to you and to me. There's nothing you can do to earn it, but there's also nothing you can do to repay it. There's nothing you can do to hide from him. No matter where you go, how far and how fast you run, he will find you. That all of us at one point in our lives have lived in Lodabar. We've lived in graceless places, living graceless lives, sometimes surrounded by graceless people. But God comes and finds us there, and he brings us to the king's table. It's the kind of grace that you can't hide from and you can't earn, but you receive anyways. That kind of grace is available to you, and it's available to me. And so if you haven't experienced that kind of grace, today is the day that you need to take advantage of experiencing that kind of grace. It's here for you today and now. That's why I'm here today, to tell you about this kind of grace for you. It doesn't matter what kind of life you've lived, what kind of choices you've made, the people you've hung out with, the people you've hurt. It doesn't matter what kind of hurts you've had. The grace that's given to us because Jesus died on a cross is greater than all of that combined. No sin is greater than God's grace. The Bible tells us that where sin abounds, grace abounds much more. You can't out-sin God's grace. So it's available to you and it's available to me. The second thing is this, and this is important to those of us who have already experienced and received that kind of grace. And that is the same kind of grace that God offers you and me, we're now to offer others. See, we can't live graceless lives and experience the grace of the King at the same time. And I think so many times churches and Christians have become graceless places and graceless people. And people walk in who are hurting, and they are broken, and they are bruised, and they are beat down by the world that we live in, and yet we offer them no grace. I'm talking the little things and the big things. Like how many times have you been driving in your car and someone's cut you off, right? And you just know they did it on purpose, right? They had to have, because you've never cut anyone off on accident ever, right? That's never happened before. You've never just accidentally been daydreaming and cut someone off, or been in a hurry somewhere and didn't realize how close you were and pulled over a little bit too fast. I know you've never done that before, but this person right now is doing that to you, right? When we offer no grace, right? We want everyone to judge us on our intentions, yet we want to judge everyone else on their actions, right? So we're to offer that same kind of grace. It also means the same kind of grace of forgiveness for those who have hurt us. You see, we've all hurt God, yet he offers us grace anyways. And so we're to offer those who hurt us the same kind of grace. When we don't, it's like we're saying to God, thank you so much, Lord, for giving me grace, but I cannot give grace to that person. Thank you so much, Lord, for loving me even when I haven't done anything to deserve it, but I can't love that person. Lord, thank you so much for forgiving me of all the things that I've done to hurt you, but they've hurt me in a way that I can't forgive, God. Those two don't line up. The Bible's pretty clear on that as well. So the kind of grace that we receive from God is the exact same kind of grace that we're supposed to give as well. You couldn't earn it and you don't deserve it, and so you should give it to those who haven't earned it and still don't deserve it. That's the point of it all. Just give grace. Give kindness to others, loving kindness, God's kindness to others, grace. The reason they hurt you is because they're broken and hurting too. And just as God offers you grace, you're now to offer them grace. But it doesn't just stop there, because the third thing is this, I want to say to you, that we don't receive grace to keep grace. Like we just talked about that, right? God doesn't give us grace so that we can keep grace. I'm going to take it a step further. You don't receive grace so that you can give grace. That we actually receive grace so we can take grace. Take grace from this place at the King's table on Sundays, where we get to sit in God's presence and in each other's presence and enjoy each other's company in this place that's full of grace. We are then to take this grace and not just offer it to those who walk through the door, to those who are close enough to God to say, okay, I'm going to give it a try, but to actually take it outside of these walls and take it to the Lodabars of our communities, the graceless places of our communities, and take grace to them there. Because at one point you were hiding from God as well. And He came and found you where you were in your place of Lodabar. And so now we are to take God's grace that He's given to us outside the walls into the Lodabars of our community to find those who are still hiding from God and give them grace as well. That's the story of grace that David is showing. David went to Lodabar to get Mephibosheth. He could have said, oh, he's in Lodabar? Oh, I don't want to go there. Oh, well, if he ever shows up at the palace, then I'll treat him with kindness. No, as soon as David hears about Mephibosheth, he says, go get him and bring him to the king's table. And we're to do the same thing. We're to go get them and bring them to the king's table. It's not good enough to sit in our little suburban homes and hope that those who are broken and bruised show up someday. Because they're out there hiding for a reason. So we've got to go find them and bring them to the king's table, where the tablecloth of grace will cover all of their sins just like it covers ours. That's the gospel. That's why this is the most beautiful story of grace in all of the Old Testament. And next to Jesus dying on the cross for your sins and my sins, it's the most beautiful picture of grace in the entire Bible, in my opinion. Grace is here for you, the same kind of grace Mephibosheth received. We're to give it to others, but not just give it, we're to take it and find those who are hiding from God, just like we were once hiding, and bring them to the table of grace as well. That's the story of David. That's why David had a heart that God could use. So my question to you today is, how's your heart? Especially in the area of grace. Have you found yourself becoming a graceless person, being hardened by the world around you, unwilling to offer grace to those around you? If so, you need to pray today, God, soften my heart. Help me see the world through your eyes. So that when I see broken and hurting people, even if they have reached out to hurt me, Lord, I see them through loving, compassionate, tender, and kind eyes, just like you do, so that I may offer them grace as well. How's your heart? Is it graceful or is it graceless? Only you can answer that. I can't answer that for you. God wants you to have a graceful heart, just like He does, just like David did. Go to Lodabar. Give grace, even to those who don't deserve it. Let's pray. Father, I just thank you so much for your word today. Lord, I thank you for your grace that you have offered to us. That you loved us so much before we even sought you out, Lord, you sent your Son to die on a cross for us. To give His life in place of mine, so that I may enjoy relationship with you. Lord, when I was hiding in sin and broken and bruised and hurting, you came and found me. So my prayer today, God, is that you would soften our hearts, that you would fill us with such grace, such love, such compassion, such godly kindness, that, Lord, our only response would be to take that same grace, love, compassion, and kindness to the world around us. Not to simply sit back and say, well, if somebody shows up, then we'll be nice. But to get outside of these walls, get into the community, find people in graceless places living graceless lives, and give them grace. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.